The room went quiet the second my radio crackled to life. Not the polite kind of quiet you get when someone drops a glass or misses a step. This was sharper, heavier. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. Laughter died in people's throats. Even the old ceiling fan seemed to hesitate, its slow rotation suddenly too loud in the silence. "Red alert! Commanding Officer Mitchell, report immediately." 70 pairs of eyes turned toward me. My father was still holding his drink, frozen halfway to his lips. And for the first time in my life, he didn't look like the strongest man in the room. He looked confused. 3 minutes earlier, I had been exactly where I always was in that house, standing slightly off to the side, close enough to be included, far enough to be overlooked. The Mitchell family gathering happened every year, whether anyone wanted it or not. My father insisted, said it kept tradition alive. What it really kept alive was hierarchy, an invisible ranking system built on old war stories, promotions, and who had earned their place the hard way. Tonight the house was packed. Former Marines, Army buddies, neighbors who'd known us for decades, cousins who only showed up for free food and stories they didn't understand. The air smelled like grilled meat, cheap bourbon, and something else, something sharper. Expectation, maybe. Judgment. I stood near the edge of the living room, fingers wrapped around a glass of iced tea that had long since gone warm. I hadn't taken a sip in 15 minutes. "Sarah." My father's voice cut across the room like it always did, firm, controlled, impossible to ignore. He stood near the fireplace, flanked by 2 men I recognized from old photographs. Both had that same posture, straight backs, squared shoulders, the kind of presence that never quite leaves even after the uniform does. "Come here," he said, motioning me over. I walked toward him, steady, measured. Years of training had taught me how to move without hesitation, without giving anything away. But this wasn't a briefing room or a command center. This was home, or something that used to be. "This is my daughter," my father said to the group, one hand gesturing toward me. "Sarah!" One of the men nodded politely. The other gave me a brief, assessing glance. "What branch?" he asked. "Army," I replied. "What do you do?" I opened my mouth to answer. "She works in administration," my father cut in smoothly before I could say a word. "Paperwork, logistics, that kind of thing." There it was. The label. The one he'd been using for years. A small ripple of understanding moved through the group, subtle nods, faint smiles, the kind people give when they think they've figured you out. "Ah," one of them said, "keeps the machine running." "At least it's safe," another added. "Nothing wrong with that." My father chuckled softly, taking a sip of his drink. "Yeah. She's never been anywhere near the front lines." The words landed harder than they should have. Not because they were entirely false, but because of how easily he said them, how confidently, as if he knew the full scope of my life, as if he'd ever asked. A cousin standing nearby leaned closer to her friend and whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "I always thought she'd do something more intense." "Not everyone's cut out for that," her friend replied. I felt the familiar pressure build behind my ribs, tight, controlled, contained. The same feeling I used to get years ago when I still tried to explain, when I still believed that if I said the right words in the right way, they would finally understand. They never did. So I stopped trying. "I like what I do," I said quietly. My father gave a dismissive wave of his hand. "Of course you do. It's steady, predictable. Nothing wrong with that." Nothing wrong with that? Except in his world there was. In his world, worth was measured in deployment scars, in stories told over drinks, in how close you'd come to something that could have killed you. Paperwork didn't count, strategy didn't count, command didn't count unless it came with dirt under your boots and a rifle in your hands. And me? I didn't fit that picture. "Hey," one of the older men said, shifting his weight, "at least she's serving. That's more than most people can say." "That's true," my father agreed. "I just figured she'd push herself a little more, you know." There was no malice in his tone. That was the worst part. He meant it. I glanced around the room. People were watching, not openly, not aggressively, but enough. Enough to see how I'd respond. Enough to measure me against the version of myself they'd already accepted. I didn't give them anything. I took a slow breath, letting it out evenly, grounding myself the way I had 1,000 times before. Before operations, before decisions that carried weight, most of them would never understand. Because explaining wouldn't change anything. It never had. "Someone's got to handle the details," I said, my voice calm, almost neutral. Sure, my father said, but that's not where the real pressure is. I almost smiled at that. Almost. The real pressure? If only he knew. A burst of laughter from the kitchen pulled attention away for a moment, and the conversation shifted. Stories of deployments, old missions, names I recognized but had never met. The kind of shared history that bonded people in ways I respected even if I wasn't included in it. I stepped back slightly, reclaiming my space near the edge of the room. The ice in my glass had completely melted now. I set it down on the nearest table. That's when I felt it. The faint vibration against my shoulder. Subtle at first, easy to ignore if you weren't paying attention. But I always paid attention. My radio. I stilled. No one else seemed to notice. Conversations continued. Glasses clinked. Someone turned up the volume on the music. Then it came again, stronger this time. A sharp crackle. My hand moved instinctively, fingers brushing the device clipped just beneath my jacket. I hesitated for half a second. Not because I didn't know what it meant, but because I knew exactly what it meant. And once I answered it, everything would change. I pressed the button. Static filled the air for a brief moment, just long enough for my pulse to settle into that familiar, focused rhythm. Then the voice came through, clear and unmistakable. Red alert, Commanding Officer Mitchell, report immediately. The words cut clean through the room. Not loud, but sharp enough to slice through every conversation at once. Silence followed. Real silence. The kind that makes people look at each other first, then at you. I felt it before I saw it, the shift in attention, the weight of dozens of gazes turning in my direction. Slowly, I lowered my hand from the radio. My father was staring at me now. Not dismissive. Not amused. Just staring. Probably not you, he said after a beat, a small, uncertain laugh slipping into his voice. Must be someone else. No one else laughed. The radio crackled again. Commanding Officer Mitchell, confirm receipt. This is not a drill. This time there was no ambiguity. No room for interpretation. My name. My rank. My responsibility. I lifted my gaze and met my father's eyes. For a moment neither of us said anything. Then I spoke. I have to go. For a moment no one moved. It was as if the room hadn't quite caught up to what had just happened. As if the words were still hanging in the air, waiting to be processed, translated into something that made sense. My father blinked once, then shook his head slightly like he was trying to clear it. That doesn't sound right, he said, his voice lower, now more cautious. Commanding Officer. Someone near the back let out a quiet laugh, the kind people use when they're unsure whether something is serious or not. Maybe it's a training thing another man offered. They've got all kinds of titles these days. Yeah, my father added quickly, seizing onto that explanation. Probably just internal jargon. Doesn't mean what it sounds like. I didn't correct him. I'd spent years not correcting him. The radio in my hand was still warm from where my fingers had pressed against it. I could feel the faint hum of it like a heartbeat, steady, insistent, impossible to ignore. Commanding Officer Mitchell, respond. The voice came again, sharper this time. We are escalating to full response protocol. Full response protocol. That wasn't language you misheard. A few people shifted uncomfortably. The energy in the room had changed, subtle but unmistakable. Curiosity had replaced amusement. The easy assumptions were starting to crack just a little. My father looked at me again, more closely this time. Sarah, what is that? I met his gaze. There were a dozen things I could have said. Explanations, clarifications, details he'd never asked for before. I chose none of them. I need to step out, I said, my voice even. Now. He frowned. Step out for what you're in the middle of. My phone rang. The screen lit up with a number I didn't need to read twice. Direct line, command priority. I answered immediately, turning slightly away from the crowd without actually leaving it. Mitchell. Ma'am, the voice on the other end said, tight, controlled, urgent. We have a situation. Red level escalation confirmed. You're the only commanding officer within operational radius with full clearance. I could feel the room behind me going quieter even though no one was supposed to be listening. Give me the overview, I said. Potential breach of secure communications network. Possible external interference. We've initiated containment, but we need authorization to proceed with countermeasures. My mind shifted gears instantly. The house, the people, the conversation, all of it faded to the background, replaced by something sharper, more precise. How long has the breach been active? 8 minutes. We've isolated 2 points of entry, but we can't confirm full containment without your authorization. 8 minutes was too long. Any indication of origin? Preliminary data suggests foreign intrusion, but we're still verifying. I glanced at my watch out of habit, already calculating timelines, response windows, escalation thresholds. Lock down all non-essential channels, I ordered. Maintain internal communications only. No external transmission until I review the data personally. Yes, ma'am. I'm en route. 10 minutes. Understood. We'll have the command center ready. I ended the call. When I turned back around, the entire room was watching me. Not casually. Not politely. Fully. My father's expression had changed. The certainty was gone, replaced by something unfamiliar, something closer to uncertainty. Who was that, he asked. Work, I said simply. That didn't sound like paperwork, someone muttered under their breath. I ignored it. My father took a step closer. Sarah, what's going on? There it was. The question he'd never really asked before. Not like this. Not when the answer might matter. I have a situation I need to handle, I said. I don't have time to explain it right now. That's not an explanation, he said, frustration creeping back into his voice. You can't just... The radio crackled again, louder this time, cutting him off mid-sentence. Commanding Officer Mitchell, we are at critical threshold, awaiting your direct command. Critical threshold. The words landed like a weight. I didn't look at anyone else. I didn't need to. Copy that, I said into the radio. Maintain position. I'm on my way. Confirmed. I clipped the radio back into place and reached for my jacket. Sarah, my father said again, more sharply now, you're not making any sense. Since when are you... I paused just long enough to look at him. Really look at him. At the man who had taught me discipline, resilience, strength, and somehow still never learned how to see me. I'll explain later, I said. You keep saying that he snapped. But right now it sounds like you're pretending to be something you're not. The words hung between us. For a second the room felt smaller. Tighter. Like everything had narrowed down to this one moment. I could have argued. I could have corrected him, laid everything out, forced him to see the truth he'd spent years ignoring. But there was no time. And more importantly, there was no need. Because this wasn't the moment for words. It was the moment for action. I'm not pretending, I said quietly. Then I turned and walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard someone whisper, "What just happened?" I don't know, another voice replied, but that didn't sound like a desk job. I stepped outside into the night air, the door closing behind me with a soft click. The shift was immediate. The noise of the party disappeared, replaced by something cleaner, cooler. The faint hum of distant traffic, the rustle of wind through trees, the steady rhythm of my own breathing. I moved quickly down the driveway, pulling my keys from my pocket. My phone buzzed again, another incoming call. I answered it as I reached my car. Mitchell. Ma'am, this is Lieutenant Harris, the voice said. We've identified a third intrusion point. It's more sophisticated than the others. We think they're testing our response time. Or mapping our system, I said, sliding into the driver's seat. That's our concern. Then we assume worst-case scenario, I replied. Prepare for full defensive posture. I want all access points monitored in real time. Yes, ma'am. I started the engine. How's the team holding? Waiting for you, he said. No one's making a move without your call. Good. That meant discipline. That meant control. I'll be there in 9 minutes, I said. Keep everything contained until then. Understood. I hung up and pulled out onto the road. The drive blurred into a series of calculated movements, turns, taken a little sharper than usual. Traffic lights judged not by color but by timing distance measured in seconds instead of miles. My father's voice echoed faintly in the back of my mind. She just does paperwork. I exhaled slowly, steadying myself. That version of me, the one he believed in, was easy. Safe. Predictable. But it had never been real. Streetlights flashed across the windshield in steady intervals, each one marking the distance between who I was and who they thought I was. My radio crackled again. Commanding Officer Mitchell, status update. En route, I said. ETA 8 minutes. Copy that. All units are standing by. All units. Waiting. For me. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, focus sharpening to a single point. The house, the voices, the assumptions, they were gone now. There was only the mission, only the responsibility, only the truth I'd never needed to explain. Behind me, miles away, my family was still trying to make sense of what they'd just seen. And for the first time, they couldn't. The gate opened before I even came to a full stop. 2 armed guards were already moving, one stepping forward to verify the other, signaling the control booth. The overhead lights snapped brighter, washing the entry point in a sterile white glow that erased shadows and doubt alike. I rolled down my window, handing over my credentials without a word. The guard glanced at them, then at me, then straightened instantly. "Yes, ma'am." No hesitation, no second look. The barrier lifted. Inside, everything moved faster. The base at night had its own rhythm, controlled, deliberate, every motion tied to protocol. But tonight, there was an edge to it. A tightening. Personnel moved with sharper purpose. Conversations cut short, footsteps quicker, more direct. Red Alert did that. It stripped everything down to essentials. I parked in the reserved command section and stepped out, already removing my jacket as I walked. The cool air hit my skin, grounding me, pulling me fully into the present. A soldier at the entrance snapped to attention as I approached. "Commanding Officer Mitchell." "Status," I said, not breaking stride. "Lieutenant Harris is waiting inside, ma'am. All teams are in position." I nodded once and pushed through the doors. The command center was alive. Screens lined the walls, rows of data streams, network maps, system diagnostics, flickering in constant motion. Voices overlapped in controlled bursts, each one precise, clipped, purposeful. No panic, just pressure. And in the middle of it all, "Ma'am?" Lieutenant Harris stepped forward, relief flashing across his face before discipline snapped it back into place. He handed me a tablet already loaded with data. "We've confirmed 3 intrusion points," he said. 2 are contained, the 3rd is adapting. I scanned the information as I walked toward the central console. Adapting how? It's probing different entry vectors. Every time we isolate one path, it shifts. I stopped at the main display. A live schematic of the communications network filled the screen nodes, pathways, security layers, and there it was. A flicker. Small, but wrong. "They're not just testing response time," I said quietly. "They're learning our pattern." Harris nodded. "That's what we were afraid of. How long before they map enough to bypass containment?" He hesitated. "At this rate, 20 minutes, maybe less." Too fast. I set the tablet down and stepped closer to the console, my mind already reorganizing the situation. "Who authorized the current containment structure?" I asked. "Captain Lewis, ma'am, following standard protocol." Standard protocol wasn't built for something that learned this quickly. "Pull him up." Seconds later, Captain Lewis appeared on one of the side screens. "Ma'am." "Walk me through your containment logic," I said. He did quick, efficient, technically sound. "And not enough." "They're using our own response timing against us," I said when he finished. "Every adjustment you make is giving them more data." "So what's the alternative?" he asked. I didn't answer immediately. Because the alternative wasn't safe. It wasn't standard. But it was necessary. "We stop reacting," I said finally. "We force them into a controlled path." Harris frowned slightly. "You want to guide the intrusion?" "I want to trap it," I corrected. "Right now they have freedom of movement. We take that away." I reached for the console, pulling up a deeper layer of the system architecture, one most people in the room didn't even have clearance to access. If we reroute internal traffic through a single channel, I continued, we can isolate their access point and cut them off completely. "That'll expose part of the network," Harris said. "Only temporarily," I replied. "And only if we do it wrong." I started issuing orders, my voice steady, precise. "Team Alpha, redirect non-essential communications to secondary buffer. Team Beta, initiate silent trace on the 3rd intrusion point. No active engagement yet." "Yes, ma'am." "Captain Lewis," I said, turning slightly toward the screen. "I want a false pathway set up, something that looks like a vulnerability but isn't." He blinked once, a decoy. "A controlled one," I said. "Make it believable, make it tempting." Understanding dawned in his expression. "Yes, ma'am." The room shifted. Not in chaos, but in alignment. Everyone moved with clearer purpose, now each action tied to a larger strategy instead of isolated reactions. I watched the main screen as the changes took effect. The network map adjusted pathways, narrowing traffic, consolidating the system, tightening like a net. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, "There," Harris said. The flicker changed direction. Not random anymore. Guided. "They took the bait," he added. "Of course they did." "They think they found a weakness," I said. I leaned slightly closer to the screen, tracking the movement. "Let them go deeper," Ma'am Harris asked. "They won't commit unless they believe it's real," I said. "We give them just enough." Seconds stretched. The room held its breath, not literally, but close enough. Every eye was on the screen. Every movement mattered. "Therein," one of the analysts said. Trace locked, another added. "Wait," I said. The word came out softer than the rest, but it carried more weight. We needed certainty, not assumption. The flicker moved again. Deeper. Slower now. Careful. "They're mapping the decoy structure," Harris said. "Good," I replied. "That means they're invested." Another second. Another shift. "Now," I said. "Execute containment." The command center moved as one. Keys struck, systems engaged, pathways sealed. On the main screen, the flicker stopped. Then disappeared. Connection severed, the analyst confirmed. Intrusion contained. Silence followed. Not confusion this time. Completion. Harris let out a breath he'd been holding. "We got them." I straightened, stepping back from the console. "For now," I said, "run a full diagnostic sweep. I want confirmation there are no secondary breaches." "Yes, ma'am." "Maintain elevated alert status for the next 2 hours," I added. "No one assumes this is over until we verify it." The room responded instantly, "Yes, ma'am." I stepped away from the central display, the tension in my shoulders easing just slightly. Not gone. Just managed. Harris moved to stand beside me. "We wouldn't have caught that without you." "That's not the point," I said. "It kind of is," he replied. I didn't respond. Because it wasn't about recognition. It never had been. It was about responsibility. About making the call when no one else could. I glanced at the clock. 32 minutes. From the first alert to full containment. Fast. But not fast enough to be comfortable. "We'll review everything in the morning," I said. "I want a full report on how they adapted." "Yes, ma'am." I nodded once and turned toward the exit. Ma'am Harris called after me. I paused. "Sir," he corrected himself quickly, then shook his head. I raised a hand, slightly stopping him. "It's fine," I said. He hesitated, then added, "They asked for you specifically." I looked at him. "Before you got here," he clarified, "they didn't just hit the system. They requested access through your clearance channel." That made me still. Not visibly, but enough. "They knew your name," he finished. I held his gaze for a moment, then nodded once. "Make sure that's included in the report." "Yes, ma'am." I left the command center without another word. The hallway outside was quieter, the noise of the operation fading behind me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't need to check it to know who it was. I pulled it out anyway. 43 missed calls. My father's name at the top. Followed by messages. Short, uncertain. "Sarah, call me." What is going on? "They're saying your name." I stared at the screen for a second longer than I should have. Then I locked it and slipped it back into my pocket. Outside, the night air felt different. Clearer. Colder. Or maybe that was just me. Back at the house, they were still trying to understand. Still trying to fit what they'd seen into the version of me they'd already decided on. Here, there was no confusion. No assumptions. Just reality. Rank. Responsibility. And the weight that came with both. I walked toward my car, the base lights stretching long shadows across the pavement. Behind me, the command center continued to operate controlled alert, ready. Ahead of me, something else was waiting. By the time I pulled out of the base, the story had already outrun me. I didn't know exactly how it happened, whether it was an internal briefing that reached the wrong ears, a routine report flagged higher than expected, or someone on the outside who had been watching more closely than we realized, but somewhere between containment and confirmation, my name had crossed a line. It wasn't supposed to cross. And once it did, there was no pulling it back. My phone buzzed again. And again. I ignored it for the first 5 minutes of the drive. then 10. By the 15th, the vibration had become a constant presence, like the echo of something I couldn't quite outrun. At a red light, I finally picked it up. 58 missed calls. I scrolled. Dad. 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 Unknown numbers. Cousins. Aunt Lisa. More unknown numbers. Then a text sitting at the top of the list like it had been waiting. Sarah, are you on the news? I stared at it for a moment. Then another message came in. Turn on Channel 7, now. The light turned green. I drove. Back at the house, the shift had started small. At first, it was just confusion. The kind that settles in after something doesn't quite make sense, but no one wants to be the first to admit it. She said commanding officer one of the men had muttered, staring at the door long after I'd left. Probably internal terminology, my father replied too quickly. They've got all kinds of roles now. Yeah, someone else added, doesn't mean she's actually in charge. That explanation held for about 2 minutes. Then my father's phone rang. He answered it with the casual confidence of someone who expected an ordinary conversation. Hey. He stopped. His expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough. What he said frowning, no, that's not. He turned slightly away from the group, lowering his voice. Where did you hear that? The room quieted again. People pretended not to listen. No one succeeded. Yeah, she just left, he continued. Something about work. A pause. Longer this time. My father's shoulders shifted just slightly, but enough to break the rigid line he usually carried. That's not possible, he said finally. Another pause. His grip tightened around the phone. Okay, he said. Okay, I'll check. He hung up. What was that, someone asked? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked toward the TV, picked up the remote, turned it on. Static. Then a local news channel. Breaking update on a developing security situation, the anchor was saying, her tone measured but urgent. Sources confirmed that a coordinated attempt to breach a protected communications network was successfully contained earlier tonight. My father's jaw tightened. That's naughty started. Then the screen changed. A still image appeared. Professional. Formal. Clear. My face. Not from tonight. From a briefing months ago. Uniform pressed. Expression steady. Underneath it, a line of text. Commanding Officer Sarah Mitchell. The room went completely still. We are being told, the anchor continued, that Commanding Officer Mitchell, who was already in the region at the time of the incident, personally directed the response that prevented further escalation. Someone dropped a glass. No one reacted. They're saying she was the only officer on site with the necessary clearance and authority to initiate containment protocols, the anchor added. My father didn't move. Didn't speak. Didn't breathe, at least not visibly. That can't be right, Aunt Lisa whispered. Maybe it's someone else with the same name, another voice offered weakly. But even as they said it, they knew. The image was still on the screen. Unmistakable. This is Commanding Officer Sarah Mitchell, the anchor repeated. According to official sources, she has been operating in a leadership capacity within her unit for several years. Several years. The words landed like a delayed explosion. Several years. Not weeks. Not months. Years. My father's hand tightened around the remote. Turn it up, someone said quietly. He didn't respond. Turn it up, they repeated. He pressed the button. Mitchell's role has largely remained out of the public eye due to the sensitive nature of her assignments, the anchor continued. However, internal reports describe her as a key decision-maker in high-level operations, requiring advanced clearance. A low murmur spread through the room. Confusion. Shock. Something else, too. Regret, maybe. She told us she worked in administration, one of the men said slowly. No, my father said, his voice barely above a whisper. She didn't. They all looked at him. He swallowed. We told ourselves that, he added. Silence followed. Heavy. Unavoidable. The pieces were starting to shift now, memories rearranging themselves under new light. Every time I'd tried to speak. Every time I'd been cut off. Every time they'd filled in the blanks without asking. My father's phone buzzed again. He didn't look at it. Didn't need to. He already knew what it would say. Around him, conversations started in fragments. Wait, so when she said, "Commanding officer" means that call. She wasn't. The sentences never finished. They didn't have to, because the truth had already arrived, and it hadn't come from me. I pulled into my apartment complex just after midnight. The parking lot was quiet, the building lights dimmed to their usual late-hour glow. Everything looked exactly the same as it had that morning, which felt strange, because nothing else was. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, hands resting loosely on the steering wheel. My phone buzzed again. I picked it up this time. Dad. I stared at the name. Then I answered. Sarah. His voice wasn't what I expected. It wasn't firm. It wasn't certain. It wasn't even angry. It was unsteady. Are you a commanding officer?" he asked. Straight to it. No build-up. No assumptions. Just the question. Yes, I said. Silence. Longer than any we'd shared before. But you said you worked in administration, he said finally. I do, I replied. Administration is part of my job. That's not what that looked like, he said. No, I agreed, it's not. Another pause. I could hear him breathing now, slower, heavier, like he was trying to process something that didn't fit. How long, he asked. 3 years in command, I said. Longer in the unit. Another silence. Different this time. Not confusion. Realization. Why didn't you tell me, he asked? I leaned back in my seat, looking up at the dark outline of the building. I did, I said quietly. He didn't respond. You just didn't hear me. The line went still. No denial. No argument. Because somewhere deep down he knew. He remembered. Not the details. But the pattern, the interruptions, the dismissals. The way he'd already decided who I was before I finished speaking. Sarah, he started. I closed my eyes for a second. I just got back, I said. I'm tired. Wait, he said quickly. We need to talk about this. We will, I replied, just not tonight. Sarah. I ended the call. Not out of anger. Not out of spite. But because some conversations needed more than a phone line. And more than a moment like this. I stepped out of the car and looked up at the building again. Inside, everything was quiet. Controlled. Predictable. Nothing like the room I'd left earlier. Nothing like the one I'd be walking back into soon enough. Behind me, miles away, my family was still standing in front of that screen. Still watching. Still trying to reconcile the version of me they thought they knew, with the one they'd just been shown. And for the first time in years, they didn't have an answer. I didn't sleep much. Not because of the mission we'd contained. The breach stabilized the network and set protocols for follow-up. That part of my mind knew how to rest even after high-pressure decisions. What didn't rest was everything else. The silence after I ended the call. My father's voice uncertain, stripped of certainty for the first time I could remember. The way he asked how long, instead of why. That question stayed with me longer than it should have. Because it meant something had shifted. And shifts like that don't happen easily. The next morning my phone buzzed before I even made it to the kitchen. I didn't need to check. I already knew. I poured coffee anyway. Let the routine ground me. Let the familiar movements give me something steady before I stepped back into everything waiting on the other side of that screen. When I finally picked it up, the messages had multiplied. More calls, more texts. But one stood out. We're downstairs. I froze for half a second. Then set the phone down. Took a breath. Picked it up again. Who is we, I typed. The reply came almost instantly. All of us. Of course. I closed my eyes briefly, then grabbed my keys and headed for the door. They were exactly where I expected them to be. Standing in the lobby just past the glass doors. My father in front, the rest of the family behind him, quieter than I'd ever seen them. No overlapping conversations, no easy laughter. Just waiting. The doorman gave me a look as I stepped out of the elevator. Not curious, not surprised. Just aware. Doctor, he started, then stopped himself. I shook my head slightly. Sarah is fine. He nodded. I walked toward them. My father straightened as I approached, instinctively slipping back into that posture I knew so well, shoulders squared, chin slightly lifted. but there was something missing. The certainty. Sarah, he said. No edge. No authority. Just my name. I stopped a few feet in front of him. No one else spoke. For a moment it felt like the entire room was holding its breath. I didn't expect all of you, I said. My voice was calm, neutral. Controlled. We didn't know how else to. Aunt Lisa started, then stopped. My father lifted a hand slightly, not to silence her, but to gather himself. We needed to see you, he said. I studied his face. Lines I hadn't noticed before seemed deeper now, not from age, but from something else, something heavier. Okay, I said. That was all. Not an invitation. Not a rejection. Just acknowledgement. We moved upstairs in silence. They filled my living room the same way they had filled the house the night before, but everything felt different. No one touched anything. No one commented on the space. No one tried to make small talk. They just stood there, waiting. I set my keys down on the table and turned to face them. Before anyone says anything, I said, I need to be clear about something. My father nodded slowly. You don't need to be proud of what I do, I continued. That's not what this is about. A flicker of something crossed his face. You needed me to be something you understood, I said, and when I wasn't, you filled in the blanks. No one interrupted. No one disagreed. Because they couldn't. I tried to explain, I went on, more than once. My father's gaze dropped just slightly. But every time I started, I said, you already had an answer. I let the words settle. Didn't rush to fill the space after them. Didn't soften them. They didn't need to be softened. Sarah, he said quietly. I looked at him. Really looked. At the man who had taught me discipline, strength, control. And somehow never realized I had learned those lessons too well. I didn't need you to be proud of me when you saw me on that screen, I said. My voice didn't rise. Didn't break. I needed you to respect me when you thought I was nothing. The room went still. Not the kind of stillness from shock. The kind that comes when something lands exactly where it's supposed to. My father swallowed. I never thought you were nothing, he said. I held his gaze. You didn't have to say it, I replied. That was enough. Because it was true. For a moment he didn't know how to respond. And that more than anything told me everything I needed to know. I was wrong, he said finally. The words came out slower than I expected, heavier. I thought I understood what mattered, he continued. I thought, if you weren't out there, if you weren't... He stopped searching for the right words. Visible, I offered. He nodded. Then it didn't count, he finished. Silence. I built my life around a certain idea of what service looks like, he said. And I expected you to fit into it. You didn't ask if I already did, I said. He closed his eyes for a second. No, he admitted, I didn't. Behind him, the rest of the family shifted subtle movements, quiet acknowledgments of something they were only now starting to understand. I can't change what I said, he went on, or how long I believed it. No, I agreed. But I can change what I do now, he added. I studied him. There was no performance in his voice. No attempt to reclaim authority. Just effort. Real effort. I'm not asking you to forget it, he said. Or to pretend it didn't happen. Good. Because I wouldn't. I'm asking for the chance to do better. The words hung there. Not perfect. Not polished. But honest. I let out a slow breath. I'm not ready to act like everything's fine, I said. I don't expect you to, he replied. That mattered. More than an apology. More than a promise. Understanding what not to expect. I have work, I said after a moment, a team that depends on me, decisions that don't wait for things like this to settle. I know, he said. And for the first time, it sounded like he actually did. I'm willing to talk, I added. Just not all at once. And not like this. He nodded. Whenever you're ready. I glanced around the room. At the people who had filled in the blanks. Who had nodded along. Who had never asked. I mean that for all of you, I said. No one argued. One by one they started to move quiet apologies, small nods, the kind of gestures that don't fix anything, but at least don't make it worse. When they reached the door, my father paused. Turned back. For what it's worth, he said, I saw you on that screen. I waited. He took a breath. You looked exactly like someone I would have followed. The words landed differently than the others. Not because they erased anything, but because they came from a place I understood. I nodded once. That's enough for now, I said. He accepted that. And then they were gone. Later that day, I was back at the base. Same command center. Same screens. Same rhythm. Nothing had changed. And everything had. As I stepped into the room, conversations adjusted, not stopped, not disrupted, just aligned. Ma'am Harris said, handing me the updated report. Let's go over it, I replied. Because that's what mattered. Not the screen. Not the headlines. Not the moment in that living room. This. The work. The responsibility. The quiet decisions that never made the news. That never needed to. That night my phone buzzed again. A message from my father. Proud of you. I stared at it for a long moment. Then typed back. Just respect me. 3 dots appeared. Paused. Then, I do. I set the phone down. And for the first time in a long time, that felt enough. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever been misunderstood, underestimated, or placed into a role you didn't choose, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? What would you have done in my place? Leave a comment below and share your story. And if you want more stories like this, real, grounded, and honest, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. We're just getting started.